He sat in his own restaurant, hungry and ignored, as his staff judged him for his appearance. The only person who treated him with kindness? A waitress who had no idea she was serving the CEO. Gregory Lancaster had spent the last 3 decades building his restaurant empire. What started as a single family-owned bistro had transformed into the Lancaster Grill, a chain of high-end dining establishments scattered across the country. His restaurants catered to an elite clientele, business executives, celebrities, and well-to-do families, who expected impeccable service and a luxurious experience. Yet, despite his success, something wasn't sitting right with him. He had started receiving complaints. At first, they were sporadic, an email here, a comment on social media there. But over time, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Customers claimed that his restaurants treated lower-income patrons with indifference, sometimes outright disdain. There were whispers of waitstaff ignoring customers who looked cheap, turning their backs on anyone who didn't seem like a big tipper. Gregory had built his brand on the promise of quality, not just in food, but in hospitality. If his restaurants were failing at that, it wasn't just a business problem. It was personal. One evening, sitting in his penthouse apartment in Phoenix, Arizona, he scrolled through the latest complaint. "I walked into the Lancaster Grill last night, just hoping for a nice meal after a long day. I wasn't dressed fancy, but I had money to spend. The staff looked at me like I didn't belong. No one even greeted me. I waited for 20 minutes before someone finally came over, and they made it clear I wasn't a priority. I left feeling humiliated." Do better. Gregory exhaled slowly, setting his phone down on the marble countertop. He had worked too hard to let something like this stain his reputation. He needed to see the problem firsthand, and he had an idea exactly how to do it. The next morning, he rifled through his closet, pushing past tailored suits and designer jackets until he found what he was looking for: an old, faded flannel shirt and a pair of worn-out jeans. He slipped them on, letting the fabric swallow him in a way that felt unfamiliar. Then came the finishing touches: a scruffy beard he let grow out over the past few days, an old baseball cap pulled low over his forehead, and a pair of scuffed sneakers he hadn't worn in years. He checked his reflection in the mirror. He didn't look like Gregory Lancaster, the multimillionaire CEO, anymore. He looked like an exhausted, down-on-his-luck man who just needed a warm meal. But dressing the part wasn't enough. He needed to feel it. So, before heading to the Lancaster Grill, he left his wallet at home, bringing only a few crumpled dollar bills. If he was truly going to test his staff's kindness, he couldn't rely on his wealth as a safety net. He took the bus instead of his usual black SUV, feeling the weight of every impatient sigh and judgmental glance from strangers who assumed he was just another broke man with nowhere better to be. By the time he stepped off at the restaurant, the sun was beginning to set, casting a warm glow over the building's sleek glass exterior. This was it. He adjusted his cap, took a deep breath, and pushed open the doors to his own restaurant. But this time, as a nobody. But what happened next was something he never saw coming. As soon as Gregory stepped inside, the shift in atmosphere was immediate. The Lancaster Grill was everything a high-end restaurant was supposed to be. Elegant lighting, sleek black and gold decor, and the faint aroma of seared steak and truffle butter wafting through the air. Waiters in crisp uniforms moved with practiced precision, balancing plates of gourmet dishes and wine glasses filled to perfection. But something else hung in the air. A kind of unspoken hierarchy. Gregory hesitated near the entrance, watching the way the staff interacted with the patrons. A well-dressed couple was greeted with warm smiles and ushered to a table almost immediately. A man in a tailored suit barely had to say a word before a waiter pulled out his chair and placed a menu in front of him. Gregory, on the other hand, was met with something very different. A blonde hostess, likely in her mid-20s, glanced at him over her podium. Her eyes flicked from his faded shirt to his scuffed shoes. She didn't smile, didn't greet him, just barely parted her lips to say, "Can I help you?" in a tone that made it clear she wasn't in the mood. Gregory nodded. Just looking for a meal. The hostess arched a perfectly groomed brow. Do you have a reservation? He almost laughed. He knew the reservation book was full for the night, but he also knew that VIPs and generous tippers never seemed to have trouble getting a table. He decided to play along. No, he admitted. But I was hoping you had something open, she sighed, tapping at the screen in front of her with a fingernail painted a deep, glossy red. It's going to be at least an hour. Gregory glanced around. He could see at least 3 empty tables. Tables he knew from experience were always left open for walk-ins who looked like they could afford it. Before he could say anything, a deep voice cut in. I got it, Jessica. Gregory turned. A tall, broad-shouldered man in a pressed button-up stood behind the podium, arms crossed. His name tag read, Manager, Stephen Callow. Jessica, the hostess, stepped aside, relieved to let her boss handle it. Stephen gave Gregory a once-over, then plastered on a polite but hollow smile. Sir, as my hostess mentioned, we're at full capacity tonight. I suggest checking one of the other restaurants in the area. Gregory held his ground. I don't mind waiting. Stephen's jaw tensed. There was a flicker of something in his expression. Annoyance, maybe even disgust. Sir, we have a certain atmosphere here. Most of our guests come here for a particular kind of experience. If you're looking for something more casual, there's a diner a few blocks down. There it was. The dismissal. He had expected something like this, but feeling it firsthand was something else entirely. Gregory took a slow breath, keeping his expression neutral. He wasn't going to argue. He wasn't going to pull rank. He was here to observe, to let them dig their own graves. Before Stephen could insist he leave, a new voice cut through the conversation. I can take him. Gregory turned, and for the first time that evening, he saw a genuine smile. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with warm brown skin and dark, expressive eyes. Her uniform was neatly pressed, but there was a tiredness in the way she carried herself, like someone who worked harder than she should for less than she deserved. Stephen sighed, clearly irritated. Jasmine, we don't have any open... The table by the window, she interrupted. It's empty. Stephen's expression darkened, but Jasmine didn't flinch. She simply grabbed a menu, nodded for Gregory to follow, and led him past the glares and whispers of the other staff. But as Gregory took his seat, he had no idea just how far this kindness would go, or what it would cost her. Gregory sank into the chair by the window, feeling the weight of the evening settle over him. The dining room hummed with quiet conversation and the occasional clink of silverware, but at his table, there was only silence. Jasmine set a menu in front of him, her expression warm but professional. Can I get you something to drink? Gregory glanced at the prices. He already knew them by heart, of course, but seeing them through the eyes of someone who might be counting every dollar hit differently. Even the cheapest glass of wine was more than what some people made in an hour. Just water, he said, hesitating before adding, if that's all right. Jasmine didn't flinch. She just nodded. Of course. She disappeared for a moment, returning with a tall glass and setting it down gently. Take your time with the menu. Let me know if you have any questions. Gregory wasn't sure what to say. He had walked into his own restaurant expecting to see its flaws, expecting to witness the cold indifference people had warned him about. But here was this waitress, treating him like he mattered, like he belonged, even when everything about him screamed otherwise. He glanced around. Other servers moved past his table without so much as a glance. They laughed with the well-dressed customers, poured wine with a flourish, leaned in attentively to take orders. But when their eyes flickered toward him, it was different, dismissive, uninterested. Jasmine was the only one who saw him. When she returned a few minutes later, she leaned in slightly, voice softer. I don't want to overstep, but... She hesitated, then smiled. If you're not sure what to order, I can bring out something small. On me. Gregory's throat tightened. He could have easily dropped a few $100s on dinner without a second thought. But in this moment, he let himself imagine what it would feel like if that wasn't the case. If he really was a man who had to choose between a meal and his next bus fare. He looked up at her. "You don't have to do that." "I know," she said simply. "But I want to." She didn't wait for him to argue. She walked off toward the kitchen, and a few minutes later, she returned with a bowl of soup and a piece of warm bread on the side. The portion was small, but it was plated just as carefully as the other dishes leaving the kitchen. Gregory stared at it for a moment before picking up the spoon. The soup was rich, perfectly seasoned. The bread was soft, buttery. It wasn't about the food, though. It was about the fact that this woman, a waitress likely earning just above minimum wage, had chosen kindness over judgment. He glanced at her name tag, Jasmine. He made a mental note to remember it. But before he could say anything, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Jasmine, a word." Stephen, the manager, stood by the kitchen doors, arms crossed, irritation clear on his face. Jasmine straightened. "I'll be right back," she said quietly, before walking toward him. Gregory watched as she stepped aside with Stephen. He couldn't hear the entire conversation, but he caught fragments. "You're wasting time. He's a paying customer." "Barely. Everyone deserves to be treated with respect." Stephen's face twisted in frustration. He shot a glare toward Gregory's table before muttering something under his breath and stalking off. Jasmine exhaled before making her way back. She didn't say anything about what had just happened, just smiled and asked if he needed anything else. Gregory studied her for a long moment. She had no idea who he was, no idea that she had just defended the very man who had the power to change her life. But soon, she was about to find out. Gregory could feel the shift in the air as Jasmine walked away. The kindness she had shown wasn't just unusual, it was unwelcome, at least to the people who ran this place. Stephen stood near the hostess podium, speaking in hushed tones with Jessica. Every so often, one of them would glance toward Gregory's table. He wasn't paranoid. He had been in enough high-powered business meetings to recognize when someone was being discussed. A few minutes later, Jasmine returned with a small plate of butter and extra bread. "Just in case you're still hungry," she said with a small smile. Before Gregory could thank her, a different waiter, one he hadn't seen before, appeared at the table. A young man with slicked-back hair and a forced grin. "Hey, sir," he said, barely masking his reluctance. "I just wanted to let you know that if you're planning to order an entree, we require payment up front for certain guests." The words were carefully chosen, but the message was clear. Gregory met the young man's eyes. "Certain guests?" The waiter hesitated. "It's just a policy we have sometimes." "No, it isn't." Jasmine cut in before she could stop herself. The waiter blinked, as if surprised she had the nerve to challenge him. "Excuse me?" Jasmine's jaw tightened. "We don't make people pay before they eat here." Gregory could see Stephen watching from across the restaurant, arms crossed, waiting to see how this played out. The young waiter shifted uncomfortably. "I was just following." "Let me guess," Gregory said, setting his spoon down. "You don't ask him to pay up front?" He motioned toward a businessman in a tailored navy suit, sipping from a glass of expensive wine. Silence. The waiter didn't have a response. He looked toward Stephen for guidance, but the manager gave him a slight shake of the head, silent confirmation that he should just walk away. With a forced chuckle, the waiter muttered, "Forget it," and disappeared. Jasmine exhaled, then turned to Gregory. "I'm so sorry about that. That shouldn't have happened." Gregory didn't say anything right away. He just looked at her. He saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the way she carried herself, like someone used to apologizing for things that weren't her fault. "How long have you worked here?" he asked. Jasmine hesitated, then sighed. "Almost 2 years. And you like it?" She gave him a small smile. "I like the customers." That told him everything he needed to know. Before he could say anything else, Stephen appeared. He was smiling, but there was a sharpness in his expression. "Jasmine," he said in a voice laced with faux patience. "Can I see you in my office?" Jasmine glanced at Gregory before nodding stiffly. Of course. She followed Stephen toward the back of the restaurant, disappearing into a small hallway near the kitchen. Gregory sat still, gripping the edge of the table. He could hear the faint hum of conversation around him, the clinking of plates, the distant sizzle from the kitchen. But all he could focus on was what he had just seen. The way Jasmine was being treated for simply doing the right thing. The way she had to fight just to serve him a meal like any other customer. He knew what was happening in that office. Stephen was scolding her, maybe even threatening her job. Gregory clenched his jaw. This wasn't just an isolated incident. This was a culture problem. A problem that had grown inside his company while he had been too distracted with profits and expansion. But the thing about power? It could change everything in an instant. And tomorrow, everyone in this restaurant would find out exactly who he was. The next morning, the Lancaster Grill opened its doors as usual. The staff bustled around, setting tables, polishing silverware, and preparing for another night of fine dining. No one had any idea that today would be different. At exactly 6:15 p.m., Gregory Lancaster stepped through the front doors, not in the tattered clothes from the night before, but in a tailored charcoal suit, polished shoes, and an unmistakable air of authority. Jessica, the hostess, straightened immediately. Her expression flipped from mild irritation to practiced warmth in an instant. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to the Lancaster Grill." Gregory didn't acknowledge her. His eyes swept across the dining room, searching for one person. Jasmine. She was in the middle of setting down a plate at a nearby table when she glanced up. The recognition hit her instantly. Her eyes widened, the color drained from her face. She knew. She knew exactly who he was now. The murmurs started almost immediately. Other waiters whispered to each other, stealing glances at the sharply dressed man standing near the entrance. Even Stephen, who had just stepped out of his office, froze when he saw him. Gregory slowly made his way across the room, his footsteps measured, deliberate. Every single person who had ignored him, dismissed him, or treated him like he didn't belong, now stood at attention. He stopped in front of Stephen, who was now stiff as a board. "Mr. Lancaster," Stephen finally said, forcing a tight smile. "What a surprise. If I had known you were coming, we would have prepared. Do I look like a man who needs special treatment?" Gregory interrupted, his voice calm but firm. Stephen hesitated. "No, sir, I just meant—" Gregory turned, scanning the staff. "How many of you knew who I was last night?" Silent. No one moved. Jessica swallowed hard. The young waiter who had asked for prepayment suddenly found something very interesting on the floor. Gregory let the quiet hang in the air before he spoke again. "I came here last night looking for answers," he said, his voice carrying through the restaurant. "I'd been hearing complaints about the way certain customers, were treated in my restaurants. So I decided to find out for myself." The tension in the room was suffocating. He turned his gaze to Stephen, and what I saw, his tone darkened. It disgusted me. Stephen visibly paled. "Sir, I can explain." Gregory held up a hand. "There's nothing to explain. I watched my own staff ignore me. I was treated like an inconvenience. And when one person showed me kindness, she was scolded for it." He turned toward Jasmine, his voice softer. "You stood up for me, even when you didn't have to. Even when it could have cost you your job." Jasmine opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked overwhelmed, unsure if she was about to be fired or praised. Gregory let the weight of the moment settle before he spoke again. "You were the only one who did what this restaurant was built to do," he said. "Treat people with dignity." Then, without breaking eye contact, he pulled a card from his pocket and handed it to her. She hesitated before taking it. Her eyes flicked over the text. "Promoted to General Manager. Effective immediately." The silence that followed was deafening. Jasmine's breath hitched. I don't understand." "You don't belong waiting tables here," Gregory said simply. "You belong running this place." Across the room, Stephen made a strangled noise. "Sir, you can't be serious." "I can, and I am," Gregory said, turning to him. And you? You're fired. Jessica gasped. The young waiter's jaw went slack. Stephen sputtered. Mr. Lancaster, please. I've worked here for... Gregory cut him off. You don't belong in a leadership position. Leadership requires character. And I don't reward people who bully their own employees and push away paying customers. He turned toward the rest of the staff. I suggest the rest of you take a good, hard look at the way you treat people. Because after tonight, everything changes. The weight of his words settled over the room. Jasmine, still holding the promotion card, looked up at him with tears in her eyes. But why? She asked softly. Why do this for me? Gregory gave her a small smile. Because when no one else did, you saw me. Now it's my turn to see you. And just like that, the Lancaster Grill would never be the same. The restaurant remained frozen in silence. No one dared to move. No one had expected this, least of all Jasmine. Gregory watched as she stared down at the promotion card in her hands, her fingers trembling slightly. The weight of it, the meaning of it, was settling in. I don't know what to say, she finally whispered. He smiled. Say yes. Jasmine blinked, looking around as if expecting someone to jump in and tell her it was a joke. But I've never managed a restaurant before, she admitted. I mean, I know how things run, but... You know how people should be treated, Gregory interrupted. And that's what matters most. Jasmine swallowed hard. She had spent her whole life being overlooked, passed over for promotions, treated like she was disposable. And now, the owner of the very company she worked for was telling her that she wasn't just enough. She was the best person for the job. Her voice was still uncertain. Are you sure? Gregory's expression softened. Jasmine, I've run this company for years. I've made millions. But last night, you reminded me why I started in the first place. It was never about just making money. It was about creating something meaningful. And if I can't trust someone like you to run this place, then I've already failed. Her eyes glistened, but she blinked quickly, straightening her shoulders. Then yes, she said finally, voice steady. Yes, I'll do it. The restaurant staff didn't know how to react. Some looked shocked, some looked nervous, especially the ones who had ignored Gregory the night before. They knew things were about to change. Gregory turned to Stephen, who was still frozen in disbelief. You can collect your things now, he said evenly. Stephen clenched his jaw. This is ridiculous, he muttered under his breath. All this over some random waitress. Gregory's expression darkened. Her name is Jasmine, and that's the difference between you and her. Stephen bit back whatever he was about to say. Instead, he turned on his heel and stormed toward the back office. Jessica, the hostess, took a cautious step backward, clearly re-evaluating her life choices. Gregory took a deep breath and turned back to Jasmine. You start tomorrow. But for now, he gestured toward the door. Take the rest of the night off. Go celebrate. Jasmine hesitated. Are you sure? I don't mind finishing my shift. Gregory chuckled. Jasmine, you're the boss now. You don't need my permission anymore. The realization seemed to hit her all over again. A slow smile spread across her face, a mix of shock, disbelief, and maybe, for the first time in a long time, real pride. Gregory watched her leave, feeling something he hadn't in a while, hope. Then he turned back to the rest of the staff, his voice calm but firm. This restaurant is changing. Starting now, we treat every customer with the same respect, whether they walk in wearing a suit or sneakers. The message was clear. Some would stay, some would leave, but the Lancaster Grill would never operate the same way again. And as Gregory walked out that night, he knew one thing for certain. It wasn't just a restaurant that had changed. It was him, too. Some people only show kindness when they think they'll get something in return. But real kindness, the kind that changes lives, happens when no one is watching. Jasmine had no idea who Gregory was. She wasn't trying to impress a CEO. She was just doing what she believed was right. And that made all the difference. So next time you have the chance to be kind, take it. You never know who's watching, or whose life you might change. If this story moved you, subscribe for more. There's always another lesson to learn and another story to tell.